Relatively okay session. I welcome you all to this session today. Our agenda for the series, as some of you who have joined in this session earlier, is on sustainable travel and meetings as a global priority. And we are looking at how experts like Patrick and enterprise buyers and industry partners are tackling these challenges in global markets, which are complex and heterogeneous. And figuring out how we can engage more deeply in sustainability across multiple markets which have got varying degrees of maturity and market regulatory conditions. And hopefully we will leverage learnings and case studies to make sustainability more and more relevant and actionable in all our respective markets. I'd like to give you a brief introduction of ProConsul Consulting, which is your series host. So ProConsul Consulting is a business travel consulting firm based in India. We have four primary pillars of engagement as a consulting firm, which is business travel consulting, which focuses on life cycle optimization, globalization, and program excellence. We focus also on industry advisory, where we work on corporate strategy, go-to-market advisory, and market representations. Finally, on sustainable business travel, we work with corporations and industry partners to develop a strategy, evolve standards, and figure out the most efficient communication mechanism to achieve global success. And finally, on industry events, we have multiple event formats, one of which is the one that you're attending today. We will later in the course of the year, in October 2023, conduct ProConsul Interchange. We have also got a custom event format called CXO Dialogues. I am your session moderator. I'm the president of ProConsul Consulting. I've also got a certification in sustainable business travel from the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. And I'd like, with no further ado, to introduce our guest speaker for today, which is Patrick Diemer. Patrick is the chair of the European Network of Business Travel Associations, which is also known as BT4Europe, which he helped found in February of 2022. Patrick has been named amongst the top 25 most influential people in business travel in 2017, and then again in 2022. He's a member of the board for CDS Group. He's also active as a senior advisor to Arthur D. Little and on the advisory board of Angso Management Consulting. Patrick was earlier the CEO of Lufthansa AirPlus, where he headed the global expansion strategy and developed AirPlus into a leading commercial cards issuer. So he's a very distinguished guest, and I do look forward to exchanging ideas with Patrick as we go through the session. So Patrick, a warm welcome to you on our session today. And if you have any opening thoughts, I would love to get your views.
Gaurav, thank you very much for the warm welcome and embracing business sustainable and sustainability in business travel. Much appreciated. Thank you very much for having me. And on your comment on Tuesday Blues, I attended a conference last fall, and we started a sustainable work panel, and it was the least attended panel when we started, and it was the most attended panel when we actually finished it. So I'm not concerned about that at all.
Thank you so much. I think that vote of confidence is important because normally we do have more attendees, but I guess people are slowly joining in. So we've got about 8 or 9 people who are there right now. So I'd like to get started, Patrick, with requesting you for a brief introduction of BT4Europe and what are its primary focus areas. If you could educate our listeners on that, that would be a great starting point.
Of course, the European Network of Business Travel Associations, as we are formally known, or BT4Europe, is a new kid on the block when it comes to business travel associations. It is the only pan-European business travel association, and believe it or not, business travel associations have been around in Europe for decades, but there was not a European representation. It is, however, in Europe the case that many of the legislation is now being developed and taken in Brussels rather than in Paris, Berlin, London, and Rome, and wherever. So it was a much needed development that 13 business travel associations from countries across Europe came together last year to make their voice heard with the lawmakers in Brussels, making their voice heard. I should maybe stress that it is mostly a buyer-centric association. So we feel that we represent the business travel buyer in Brussels and in other European capitals. We have three priorities on our agenda. One is greener business travel, or sustainability in business travel. Second is digital transformation, getting rid of the paperwork, which is still still a big hassle in business travel, and making it more efficient when it comes to processes. And last but not least, making the economic impact of business travel stronger and also more known to the policymakers. So that's our three priorities: sustainability, digital transformation, and economic impact.
Wonderful. So, Patrick, would you mind giving us a sense of what are the key European legislations which are current and upcoming, which focuses on sustainable travel initiatives?
Yeah, I think it is important to understand that there are a few important legislative initiatives currently discussed and developed in Brussels. When it comes to business travel, they relate to a new standard of reporting. So the European Commission will enforce a new reporting standard for greenhouse gas. CO2, carbon emission, is certainly a key component of that, but it will be more broader. It will include greenhouse gas in general. We expect this legislation to be drafted or finally drafted this quarter, actually. And second, the European Commission has been focusing on the development of online booking engines in Europe. And that is a very important development when it comes to cross-border train travel. And so we expect a new code of conduct to be enforced for online booking engines across Europe. I should say that both of these initiatives are highly welcome from a business travel perspective. Our business travel buyers expect probably even more ambitious movements by the European Commission than as it has been drafted at this point in time. But it's two good important milestones to have: a new standard and a new code of conduct for online booking engines.
Got it. So where do you think these legislations will have the maximum impact?
Now, they are two very different things, but they both drive sustainability at the end of the day. Let me maybe briefly explain the situation when it comes to standardization, the reporting standard. We are today faced with reporting requirements. Not all companies yet, but many companies already have a legal requirement to report on their greenhouse gas emissions. And these reporting standards are also filtered down, of course, to business travel management. They go across all sectors within a company, all divisions within a company. But business travel is, of course, one of the sectors also which has to report. Unfortunately, we face today a multitude of different standards, and they range from professional firms, which are for-profit emission calculating firms, to the United Nations having published a standard. So it's a huge variety, and the variety itself is a problem. We need one standard, and we see this development as very needed, because there needs to be some sort of, let's say, security for the travel manager to pick the right standard. Today, we have a number of examples where for the same flight, for the same cross-border flight in Europe, there are 7 or 8 different kilos of CO2 you emit on that very plane, and that is an unbearable situation. So we think, for the sake of business travel management, this one standard is highly welcome. The second legislation on online booking engines is maybe a very European development. In Europe, you will know that the rail infrastructure is well developed, and we can take a rail or a train for many short-haul destinations. Now, in most European countries, the way you book a train ticket is well developed in a domestic basis. But when you cross border with your rail connection, if you go, for instance, from Brussels to Paris, or from Strasbourg to Berlin, or something like that, then it is much less likely that your online booking engine will show these cross-border trips as an alternative to short-haul air. Mm-hmm. And that is something the European Commission will change, or has the ambition to change, that the display in our online booking engines of short distance rail connections need to be on the same, let's say, priority level than short-haul air. This has to do with driving more business travelers towards a more sustainable choice of travel.
Got it. So, Patrick, one of the thoughts which occurred was, how will global travel, what kind of impact will this have on global travel managers who've got a significant amount of travel to, from, and within Europe? How do they prepare for this change? Will it materially impact them on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, and however, it will make an impact, but the impact really depends on the situation the company is in, or the situation the business travel is in your jurisdiction. The standard is something which will probably be welcome from business travel, from travel managers around the world, because it will be delivered by your supplier. So it will be delivered by your airline. It will be delivered by the rail company, and so forth. To have one single standard means that all sources, wherever you get your sustainability information from, all sources will report the same amount of CO2 or greenhouse gas for a particular flight. I can only assume that this will be highly welcome from everybody. Whether you can make, or whether you should be making use of this, is really dependent on whether you are under a reporting requirement in your country. This reporting requirement can, of course, be mandatory or voluntarily if your company wants to report this. But increasingly so, we observe that these reporting requirements travel internationally. And so I guess this is a highly needed. But the information about on the CO2 air or greenhouse gas emissions will be coming from your supplier, and they will be delivered to you by the infrastructure provider you might need. That could be the TMC, that could be the GDS, that could be an independent third party, however your setup is. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the online booking engine change, using more rail or train services for cross-border travel in Europe, that is as I said, a very European matter. And it really depends on how much your employees travel within Europe. And so as much as you use an online booking engine, which has some significant presence in Europe, as Concur or Cytric, I think you will be just fine, because they will adhere to this more or less automatically. They are being forced to adhere to this. Of course, smaller players will not be forced into the same regime. So I think for the time being, it's difficult to say how exactly you can prepare for this. But also here, you can trust that your online booking engine provider will make the changes required. You don't probably have to make these changes you yourself.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I'm trying to watch the chat as I'm going through, and unfortunately, I'm skipping a few slides from time to time. So, given this situation, one perceives that Western Europe and Western European corporations are fairly ahead of the rest of the world when it comes to adopting sustainability practices. At the same time, one gets a sense when one talks to different commentators in the area of business travel sustainability that there is sometimes a superficial subscription to sustainability initiatives. In your perspective, how real is sustainable business travel programs for BT4Europe members?
Gaurav, let me first say that I completely understand the background of this question. I think we are at the beginning of a development here. We are not, by far not, in a situation where this is a mature area of development. We are experimenting in many ways, but please, there's one piece of confidence I have. This issue will not go away anytime soon. There is so much pressure in our societies in Europe, in the political discussion in Europe. There's so much focus on climate change. And I think our industry, and in particular, the users and the suppliers in our industry, are under significant pressure to actually make their contribution to less emissions, to fewer emissions. So it will last, and it will be ongoing. It is, in my perception, it is a real issue, and there will be change coming. Now, where are we with this change? Where are we with sustainable travel programs? That really is a question where I would say we are at infant stage at this point. Look, I was just talking about having a standard, and that seems the lowest level of a first step you need to take to have a standard. Then, because only when you have a metric like that, you can actually get moving. But I think it will come. It will come for legal recording requirements, and it will come also for employee demands. Today, when we talk to travel managers, it seems to be a bit industry specific also. We see it's very high on the agenda for consulting firms. It's very high on the agenda for all public administration, which is also a significant contributor to business travel. It's high on the agenda for IT firms, for financial services. It is less high on the agenda for the traditional for the traditional industry sectors, like the production industry, things like that. But they're coming also. So I think it is something which will last and which we will have to embrace as the industry.
Got it. So Patrick, if we look at best practices that are emerging from Western Europe, what are some of the best practices that global markets can adopt? Some low-hanging fruit that could be easily implemented by other markets, in your opinion?
No, it is my perception that there is not a clear blueprint yet where we can say, okay, let's copy paste that travel policy and that strategy, and then we are good. The many companies are experimenting at the moment. Of course, there are some low-hanging fruit. Take the train if you can avoid short-haul planes. Compensate your CO2. Use sustainable airline fuels. And there are more of these examples where you can actually say, okay, the industry is making its first steps. Also, when it comes to who is actually deciding, I think there is a trend there as well. You can, of course, say, I am the global travel manager. I enforce the use of greener hotels. I enforce the use of greener car rental firms. I enforce the use of rail over air and things like that. But you can also delegate the decision-making to your employees at the time when they actually make the booking. And that seems to be the way companies go. So they can give an incentive to the employees who are making a greener choice. They're giving them the information about the emissions they produce when they travel. So there are a few good examples, but there's not a clear situation yet where we say, okay, here's a blueprint travel policy and travel strategy you can use for around the globe. It's more experimenting at the moment.
I think probably Western Europe is a little further down the trail of experimentation, or given the various legislations that you're contending with. How successful have European companies been in creating global sustainable travel programs across multiple geographies, or is this largely still limited to Western Europe?
I'd say not so successful yet. They all seem to be starting in their home base. So a French company would typically talk about their domestic French situation first. An Italian company will talk about and take decisions on the situation in Italy first, and so on. And they still have to conquer their own international network with this. But I am 100% sure this will come. The multinational programs are today a standard for travel management around the world. So you want 1 or 2 TMCs, you want 1 or 2 GDSs, you want payment solutions, travel across the board, you want expense solutions globally. And this will also be the case for the sustainability approach. So I think it will be maybe developed in 1 or 2 countries where these multinational firms are located, but we will certainly see these programs being rolled out globally as well.
So we had this conversation a couple of weeks back where we featured Johnny Torson, and he talked about creating a metric-driven sustainable travel program. What is your view on building such metric-driven programs which have got different parameters to evaluate and implement? How do you look at it?
I think it is very much needed. I think we need to talk numbers and not just make political statements. I see 2 levels here. One is the metrics you develop for a program in a company, where you can actually compare then calendar year 2021 with calendar year 2022 and so forth. You can develop these metrics also based on, how much travel did we actually do, because your business development might require more travel in 1 year rather than the year before, and things like that. So this will be the company level. For this, the forthcoming standard for greenhouse gas emissions is highly needed, and I think that we will make significant progress. Also, when it comes to compare companies with each other, or compare travel programs with each other. So that's one level. I also think that it is a real thought to create a metric for the industry, because we need to make sure that our societies understand that business travel is actually needed to conduct business professionally and successfully, and that we cannot just stop business travel just because we think it is something of less importance. And I believe we also as an industry need to think whether we create a metric to show what's our progress towards more sustainable business travel.
So there is a question here from Bindu Dominic, who manages a global travel program sitting outside of Europe. And her question is actually a pain point that most travel managers outside of Western Europe and perhaps North America face. And that's the question of reporting on carbon emissions, particularly relating to meetings and events. So most suppliers and vendors in the APAC region, for example, are unable to provide quality insights and reporting. How do you think the industry can become more customer-centric from a reporting standpoint? Is there any learnings from Europe that can be taken by organizations in this domain, particularly around hotel emission reportings and event emission reportings?
Now, unfortunately, this question addresses a real issue which I don't have a good answer to myself as well. It's a really important question. which is looking for an answer of our industry. Now, I mentioned that the European Commission is developing a standard on greenhouse gas emissions. This has a number of setbacks, and their approach has a number of disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages that they are talking about transportation only at the moment. And transportation, as defined by the European Commission, is you move a person or cargo, you move a person from A to B. So this could be it's related to air, it's rail travel, it's car rental. But it is not the accommodation and event space. And accommodation and events are, of course, critical to business travel as well. We have to embrace those standards also for these industries. It is also in this area the issue that there are almost too many standards and initiatives. And it would be very good if the event industry or the hotel industry could agree amongst each other on a reporting standard. That would be a significant step forward.
So one of the things that also cropped up was this recent ban by France on short-haul flights, and the fact that they have, I think, announced this ban and made it official that there will be no short-haul flights of a certain duration. Do you feel that kind of legislation is going to be more and more widespread across Western Europe, given the maturity of the rail network?
So it's very difficult to say because also in France, this is not yet implemented. It is as a draft legislation. And even the draft legislation has a number of considerations which will eventually not make it illegal to use short-haul planes. So just as an example, if you live in Toulouse, which is in southern France, and you want to go to New York City, you typically fly to Paris, which would be your long-haul hub, and then change planes and go to New York City. And whether that is also considered to be a short-haul trip is questionable. But if you allow that, then who is actually going to pay for the fact that you don't have the plane full due to the fact that this O&D will not be served for domestic travel? So there's a lot of nuances to this yet, and I'm not quite sure whether the French legislation will actually become as strict as it was discussed when it was first drafted. In other European countries, I do not see that happening. It's pretty much market driven, and that's actually probably a good development that the customers just take that train for short haul because A, it's cheaper, B, it is maybe more wanted by the employees, and it provides less CO2 emissions. So I see a market-driven development which goes against the short-haul flights, and that's probably all that is needed.
So therefore, you feel that legislation itself will not drive a shift from air to rail. It'll be more a choice exercise by the customer that will drive it.
I think so, yes.
Got it. In your view, how do you look at sustainable aviation fuel? There is so much discussion around sustainable aviation fuel. Is it really a solution for the future, or is it more something interim, pending more advancement in technology going forward?
I think that we should be open to the way we actually reduce CO2. There are a few options available to us today, how we reduce the CO2 emissions, but there might be more coming up. And it is very difficult to bet on one solution only. So having said that, I believe that sustainable aviation fuel is a real option to reduce CO2 emissions. It is something which a few business travel customers have actually embraced, and I can see that more will do so. As the production goes up, the unit costs will come down, which is because at the moment it's still very expensive. Whether this will be the only solution for the airline industry, it's questionable, because when you look at how much kerosene the aviation industry is actually using. And if you would replace all of that with sustainable aviation fuel, you run into a significant capacity issue. You also need significant electricity to produce produce the SAF, which is not in existence today. So I believe it's going to be part of the solution. I think it has a future, but it will not be the only thing we need to be doing.
How do customers contend with the massive difference in the pricing of sustainable aviation fuel? Even if they do want to exercise that choice, is that a barrier to adoption? Or are European travelers willing to pay a supplement in order to deploy sustainable aviation fuel?
No, I have a personal opinion here. I believe at the end of the day, we as the customers need to be forced to use some level of sustainable aviation fuel, because as you rightly so say, the price difference is significant, and it is so significant that we probably have to accept that the legislator comes in and forces us to use 10% or 20% of the kerosene being produced in a sustainable way.
So you believe that legislation will come which will compel the use of a certain percentage of SAF till an alternate option is developed?
If we want to make SAF a real, let's say, significant solution to the issue, I think we need to have the legislator come in. Mm-hmm. Because it makes the air ticket significantly more expensive, and we're talking about like easily 10% and more price increase, and so that is very difficult to expect that somebody will do this on a voluntary basis.
How are you viewing these options that are coming up from airlines, which are requesting for supplementation of charges? Is that something that is finding a lot of traction in Europe, particularly the initiatives, I think, by Lufthansa, which is offering SAF supplements and so on? Is that a trend that is seeing a lot of adoption in your part of the world?
I think it starts with the fact that first of all, Gaurav, I don't really know how much that is adopted. I see this myself when I book trips. I think there you can easily see how expensive SAF is at the moment. But it is also a good first move that these options are available at all, because in the past we didn't have this option. So now we see the price difference, we can act accordingly, and that's already a step forward, I believe.
So Caroline here has a comment, and she mentions that given the time that it will take for sustainable aviation fuel to be standard in the market and come across easily, I think the only option is to actually do less travel and probably pack lighter. Do you agree with that sentiment?
As a matter of fact, I believe that companies, look, we seem to think that, or we all frequently discuss it in a way that all companies are alike and all corporates are alike, and they're not. Some corporations have come out of the pandemic and they've said, okay, we learned that we can live with 20% of the business travel we had before. So it means minus 80. And we're still in existence, and we still survive, and we're still doing good in business. So we keep it like that. Mm-hmm. So we make a real effort, top down, to decide, okay, there's only so much business travel we want, which has, of course, a significant positive emission side effect, or a positive side effect on sustainability. Other companies after the pandemic have come back to normal and to do business as before, and so it's a garden full of different flowers, and we will see this developing going forward. Some will take a more restrictive approach, some will have a more liberated approach, and some will be focusing more on sustainable business travel. Some probably ignore it, and so it is not one solution for everybody.
Got it. So there's another comment here from Poonam, who represents a very large IT company based out of India, and she talks about the learnings of COVID, and that during COVID, everyone pretty down down their shutters on business travel, including large IT firms and consulting firms who are not really traveling all over the world to execute. But that learning seems to be very quickly lost when we return to normalcy. If you see the numbers, particularly in markets like India, aviation numbers are back to or in a little ahead of 2019 numbers, as I'm sure it's happening in many other parts of the world. Do you feel? Do you find this happen in your part of the world as well? That numbers are really catching up so quickly that.
Yeah, sorry for me smiling, because I was almost trying to say, oh, where's the question? And now, this is a very fair observation, and I see this as well. There are geographies or regions on the globe which are back to 2019 and more. And there are others where business travel still has to pick up. And certainly Europe is in the second category. We are still very significantly below 2019 when it comes to business travel. And whether that's good or bad, we just observe. That's what it is, you know.
Got it. How do you view carbon offsets? Is this a real and effective solution to managing emissions?
Carbon offset programs had their own problems lately, given that we found out that actually planting trees or plants in general, protecting the environment from deforestation and so on, is maybe not as easy to track and as easy to audit as we all had hoped for. But leaving these recent issues aside for a second, to carbon offset, I'm almost like to give the same answer as for SAF. Carbon offset will not save the day, but it is a good move, and we should supporting it. It will be part of the solution, and whatever we can do to enforce sustainability, I think it's a good way forward.
So there's a question here from Bijoy, who actually works with Rotary International, and he wants to know how can companies get started around curtailing emissions and being more carbon responsible? What could be the first couple of steps to get started?
I think that's a really cool question. And I think it starts with the visibility of the emissions. So talk to your suppliers. And if it's as easy, or not as easy, but maybe it is a pragmatic step to ask your online booking engine whether the sustainability information is in the online booking engine when you take, or your staff takes, a decision on how to travel. Because now that is, in many online booking engines in Europe, at least, the standard that you see what's your emission if you pick alternative A over alternative B. So the visibility of that is where it starts, and then from the reporting, you go further. Yeah. So do you want to prohibit flights or modes of travel with higher emissions? How much can you promote train and all of this? This very much depends on where you are and what travel infrastructure is available to your company. But in some areas that there are alternatives to high emission travel.
So it starts with getting the industry to support carbon reporting. That becomes almost the first step in establishing a baseline from where you start analyzing your progress or digression. I understand.
I perfectly agree. Yes.
Okay. So my final question, and I guess we might get a couple of more on the chat. What do you see as the future for sustainable business travel programs? What are the
next? At BT4Europe, we see our industry being under significant pressure to bring emissions down. And we believe that this is not just the flavor of the day. This will not go away anytime soon. And we are ready to actually play our role in climate change here. So we will see a global reporting standard on greenhouse gas. I hope that what the European Commission is now developing is something which could travel internationally. We will see it in the course of the year when this draft legislation is going to be published. But I am 100% sure that there will be a global reporting standard on greenhouse gas. I also feel confident about this when I discuss with my colleagues in the United States. They are also after the reporting globally. And in practical steps on how does greener business travel look like? I think there will be more rail. I think there will be more e-cars. I think there will be more compensation. I think there will be more SAF. And I think there will be less business travel.
Yeah, that's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, that actually business travel will have to drop. Is it left a dying industry?
Gaurav, let me make a comment to that. The question is not so much whether business travel will drop, but the question is whether, as our global economies grow, does business travel have to grow in the same way, or are we okay with less growth?
Got it.
Yeah. So I am not an advocate to say we need to stop business travel, because I think it's unrealistic, and I also have personal, too much benefit from meeting people in real life, and I see there's as a true demand to do this. But as we develop our societies and our businesses, does business travel have to grow in the same way it did in the past? That's the question, and I believe we can be more conservative here.
Got it. There's another question here on the chat, and the question really relates to investment in sustainable aviation fuel by a lot of primary airlines. For example, United has invested in a company called Svante. How will the actual consumer, or when will the actual consumer start to see the benefit of such corporate decisions being taken by airlines? When will it become real for all of us? I think there's been some investment also.
It starts to become real already. Yeah, you can. Many airlines now offer their customers an option to mix sustainable aviation fuel into the fuel mix, into the kerosene mix of your trip. Now, this is a bit of an artificial mixture, of course, because you will not change what is being pumped into your plane you take. But I would trust that the airline industry is on a good path here, and will truthfully so deliver what they promise when they say, every dollar you invest into SAF is also going to be actually being used for you. So I believe it starts to become real already this year.
Mm-hmm. So you would feel that these results will start showing in terms of customer choices, or will it also start showing in customer airfares? Both, I guess.
Both. In North America and in Europe, we already have the choice.
Got it. Understood. So I think that pretty much brings me to the end of my questions. Patrick, do you have any other closing thoughts from your end? I mean, there have been quite a number of questions actually from the audience, and I guess there are a lot of unanswered questions that everyone's got. How do we take this forward? Where do we go from here? Is this industry a dying industry, or has this got a future? I think it'll be one.
I'm 100% convinced this is an industry with a bright future, but it's also an interesting industry to work in, because there are always new things, new developments, and new issues we need to deal with, and sustainability is just one of them. And I believe this will be staying with us for quite some time, and will become part of the solution here.
Okay, I understand. So I think there are probably a lot of unanswered questions, and I guess as we go through the series, we'll probably be talking to more and more people like Patrick to get guidance on how we will take this forward. So thank you, Patrick, for your time today. It was wonderful and very kind of you to share your views on on sustainable business travel and how we can take it forward. Thank you to the audience as well for having joined in today. Perhaps not in as much numbers as we would have preferred, but it still nonetheless was a fairly active conversation. I'd also like to close by inviting you to our fourth episode, which is on the 24th of May, when we will feature Scott Gillespie, who is the industry advisor from T-Clara, and he'll be talking about, again, a radically new initiative on how to go about managing the business travel spend. So thank you again, Patrick, and thank you to the audience for a wonderful session today, and I think some very key learnings, which I'll shortly summarize and place on LinkedIn as well very soon. So thank you again, Patrick, and thank you to the audience. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gaurav. It was a pleasure to be